Robert Louis Stevenson's Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, first published in 1886, is a Gothic novella that explores the hidden darkness within human nature. The story follows the respected Dr. Henry Jekyll, whose experiments allow him to transform into the violent and uninhibited Edward Hyde, gradually placing both his reputation and his life in danger. Stevenson's literary style combines Gothic horror, mystery, psychological suspense, and symbolism, gradually revealing the connection between Jekyll and Hyde through shifting perspectives, documents, and dramatic revelations. The novella explores themes of good and evil, duality, repression, identity, temptation, morality, reputation, and the consequences of surrendering to one's darkest impulses. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde remains important for its influential portrayal of the divided self and its enduring examination of the conflict between respectable public identity and hidden private desires. The story starts with Mr. Utterson, a respectable London lawyer, taking one of his usual Sunday walks with his distant relative and friend, Mr. Enfield. The two men are quiet, proper, and careful not to involve themselves in gossip, but during their walk, they pass a neglected door attached to a strange building in an otherwise respectable street. The sight prompts Enfield to tell a disturbing story. One night, Enfield saw a small, ugly, unsettling man trample a young girl in the street. When Enfield and a crowd forced the man to make amends, he entered the strange door and returned with a check for £100. The check carried the name of a highly respected gentleman, which made Enfield suspect blackmail. He refuses to name that gentleman at first, but he does reveal that the cruel man's name is Hyde. Utterson immediately becomes concerned because he already knows that name. Back at home, Utterson studies the will of his friend Dr. Henry Jekyll. The document says that if Jekyll dies or disappears, all his property must pass to Edward Hyde. This has always troubled Utterson, but Enfield's story makes the matter feel dangerous. He visits Dr. Lanyon, another old friend of Jekyll's, hoping for answers. Lanyon has never heard of Hyde and explains that he and Jekyll have grown distant because of Jekyll's strange scientific interests. Utterson begins watching the door until he finally meets Hyde. Hyde is small, young, and deeply unpleasant, though Utterson cannot clearly explain what makes him so disturbing. Hyde gives Utterson his address, which makes the lawyer suspect that he is waiting for Jekyll's death so he can inherit. Utterson then visits Jekyll's home and learns from the butler Poole that Hyde has a key to Jekyll's laboratory and that the servants are ordered to obey him. Utterson concludes that Hyde must be blackmailing Jekyll over some hidden wrongdoing. A few weeks later, Jekyll hosts a dinner party, and Utterson stays behind to speak privately with him. When Utterson raises the subject of the will and Hyde, Jekyll becomes uneasy. He insists that the situation is unusual but under control, claiming that he can be rid of Hyde whenever he chooses. Still, he asks Utterson to promise that he will honor the will if necessary. Utterson is not satisfied, but he agrees. Nearly a year later, Hyde's violence becomes far worse. A maid sees him murder Sir Danvers Carew, a kind and respected member of Parliament, by beating him with a cane in the street. Because Carew is carrying a letter addressed to Utterson, the police call the lawyer to identify the body. Utterson leads them to Hyde's rooms in a grim part of London, where they find part of the broken murder weapon and burned pieces of Hyde's checkbook. Hyde himself has vanished. Utterson visits Jekyll, who looks terribly ill and shaken. Jekyll claims that Hyde is gone from his life forever and shows Utterson a letter supposedly written by Hyde, saying Hyde has means of escape and does not deserve Jekyll's generosity. But when Utterson later asks Poole who delivered the letter, Poole says no messenger came except the regular mail. Utterson then shows the letter to his clerk, Mr. Guest, who notices that Hyde's handwriting resembles Jekyll's, only slanted differently. Utterson fears Jekyll may have forged a letter to protect a murderer. For a while, Hyde disappears and Jekyll seems restored. He becomes healthier, more social, and more charitable. Utterson feels relieved, as if Hyde's evil influence has finally been removed. But the peace does not last. Jekyll suddenly shuts himself away and refuses visitors. When Utterson visits Lanyon for an explanation, he finds him gravely ill and terrified. Lanyon says he has received a shock that will kill him and refuses to discuss Jekyll. After Lanyon dies, Utterson receives a sealed letter from him, but the instructions say it must not be opened until after Jekyll's death or disappearance. One Sunday, Utterson and Enfield pass the old door again and see Jekyll at a window above the laboratory. They try to persuade him to come outside, but Jekyll says he cannot. For a brief moment, the conversation seems friendly. Then terror crosses Jekyll's face, and he abruptly shuts the window. Utterson and Enfield walk away in silence, shaken by what they have seen. The crisis comes when Poole arrives at Utterson's house one night, deeply frightened. He believes something terrible has happened to Jekyll. Utterson follows him through dark, windy streets to Jekyll's home, where the servants are gathered in fear. Behind the locked laboratory door, a strange voice refuses to admit visitors. Poole insists it is not Jekyll's voice. Poole explains that the person inside has been sending desperate notes to chemists, demanding a particular ingredient that no one can provide correctly. He has also seen the figure inside the laboratory, and it is too small to be Jekyll. To Poole, it looks like Hyde. Utterson first wonders if Jekyll may be horribly ill and deformed, but at last he and Poole decide to break down the door. Inside, they find Hyde's body on the floor, dressed in Jekyll's clothes, which are far too large for him. He has apparently poisoned himself, but there is no sign of Jekyll, alive or dead. Utterson and Poole search the laboratory and the rooms connected to it, finding strange scientific equipment, a mirror, and finally an envelope addressed to Utterson. Inside are a new will naming Utterson instead of Hyde, a note from Jekyll instructing him to read Lanyon's sealed letter, and Jekyll's own full confession. Lanyon's letter reveals the first part of the truth. He explains that he once received an urgent message from Jekyll asking him to break into Jekyll's laboratory, retrieve a specific drawer, and wait at home for a visitor at midnight. Lanyon obeyed, though he thought Jekyll might be insane. The drawer contained powders, a red liquid, and records of experiments. At midnight, Hyde arrived, dressed in clothes too large for him and desperate for the contents of the drawer. Hyde mixed the chemicals into a strange drink and asked whether Lanyon wanted to witness the result. Lanyon insisted on seeing the matter through. Hyde drank the mixture, and before Lanyon's eyes his body changed. The small, deformed Hyde transforms into Dr. Jekyll. The shock destroys Lanyon's peace of mind and health, leading to his death. Jekyll's final statement explains everything. He has always felt divided between his respectable public self and his hidden immoral desires. As a scientist, he becomes obsessed with the idea that human beings are not truly one nature but two. He creates a potion meant to separate these sides, hoping to free each part of himself from the other. When he first drinks the potion, he becomes Edward Hyde. Hyde is smaller and uglier because he represents the evil side that has long been suppressed. At first, Jekyll is not horrified. He feels liberated. As Hyde, he can indulge forbidden desires without damaging Jekyll's public reputation. He gives Hyde a home, money, and a place in his will, allowing his darker self to move through the world independently. But Hyde grows more vicious. Jekyll begins losing control, especially when he wakes one morning and realizes he has transformed into Hyde without taking the potion. Alarmed, he stops using the drug for a time. Yet after months of restraint, he gives in again. Hyde returns with pent-up savagery and murders Sir Danvers Carew. Jekyll is horrified afterward and swears never to become Hyde again. For a while, Jekyll lives virtuously and seems at peace. But even without transforming, he begins indulging darker impulses in his own person. That weakness is enough to trigger another spontaneous transformation, this time while he is away from home. As Hyde hunted for murder, he cannot safely return to the laboratory, so he sends Lanyon to retrieve the chemicals that allow him to change back. From then on, Jekyll must take stronger and more frequent doses just to remain himself. Hyde grows stronger as Jekyll grows weaker. The scene at the window when Utterson and Enfield see Jekyll suddenly terrified happens because the transformation is beginning against his will. Then the chemical supply fails. Jekyll discovers that the original ingredient must have contained an unknown impurity that made the potion work, and the newer batches cannot reproduce the effect. Knowing that he will soon become Hyde permanently, Jekyll uses the last of the working potion to write his confession. He does not know whether Hyde will kill himself or be captured, but he knows that his own life is effectively over. By the time Utterson reads the account, Dr. Jekyll no longer exists. The mystery of the door, the will, Hyde's violence, Lanyon's terror, and Jekyll's seclusion all lead back to one truth. Jekyll's attempt to divide good from evil does not free him from sin. It gives his darkest self a body, a name, and finally the power to destroy him.